Everyone laughed. Every Tuesday morning, before the sun cleared the grain elevator, a rusted flatbed rumbled down Route 12 and stopped at the mouth of a gravel drive. Off came blue plastic barrels, scuffed, stained, and split along the sides, most still carrying the faint smell of syrup, soap, or machine oil. Waiting beside the road was 17-year-old Junie Marsh, wearing her father's work gloves 3 sizes too big. One by one she rolled the barrels into the dead grass behind her grandmother's farmhouse. By the end of spring, 40 stood there. Soon there were 60. Drivers slowed just to watch a girl stack other people's garbage as though it were treasure. Harlan Price, owner of the feed and hardware store on Main Street, gave the pile a name. "Marsh's Junk Church," he announced one morning, loud enough for everyone at the counter to hear. "That girl's building a shrine out of other people's trash." The men near the register laughed. That was a dangerous year to look foolish. The worst drought in a generation had the valley holding its breath. Wells were dropping. Pastures had turned the color of straw. Yet Junie kept hauling home empty barrels she had no water to fill. By October, the driest October the valley had seen in 30 years, those same men would stand at the end of her gravel drive with their caps in their hands. Before them, something impossible would be growing out of the garbage they had thrown away. Not one of them would be laughing. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And if you believe the world sometimes throws away things it never understood, subscribe. Because what Junie Marsh built behind that farmhouse was not luck, a miracle, or some mysterious green thumb. It was a system almost nobody in town had heard of. To understand why she built it, we have to return to the winter when everything fell apart. Junie had grown up on 11 acres at the end of Route 12, inside a low white farmhouse her great-grandfather had built by hand. The land had never made the family rich, but it had always been enough. A garden, a few chickens, and a deep cold well her father Tom checked every morning. In February, Tom Marsh died. His heart stopped in his sleep at 44, while the ground outside remained frozen too hard to bury him properly for a week. 2 people were left behind. Ada Gran was 79, with a heart condition the town doctor listened to before growing strangely quiet. Junie was 17. Suddenly the only person standing between that house and the end of everything her family had kept alive. By April, the money was almost gone. Gran's garden, tended for 60 years, rose thin and yellow because the well Tom had nursed along was finally failing. Its level dropped an inch a week, then 2. What little water came up was brown and tasted of iron. Food could not grow without water. During the driest spring anyone remembered, water was the one thing the Marsh place no longer had. Through all of it, Junie kept one piece of her father close, a dented tin minnow bucket with blue paint worn from the handle. Tom had carried it to the river every summer of her childhood. She no longer fished, but she could not bring herself to put it away. His voice stayed with her, too. "Nothing's really worthless, Junie," he used to say in the shed, turning a broken tool over in his hands. "Some things are just waiting on the right use." She had heard those words 100 times without understanding them. Standing beside a dying well and a garden that would not grow, she finally did. The first pieces of her answer were waiting at the county recycling yard. Stacked against a chain-link fence were blue food-grade barrels and one enormous white tank held inside a steel cage. The tank had once carried fruit syrup to a bottling plant 2 towns over. "Free if you haul them," the man at the gate said. He almost thanked her for taking them. Bringing the barrels home was strange enough. What Junie did next convinced the town she had lost her mind. Using a borrowed jigsaw, she cut several barrels lengthwise, laid the halves on supports, and drilled drainage holes through the bottoms. Then she filled them, not with soil, but with clean river gravel. Bucket after bucket came up the bank in her father's minnow bucket until blisters covered her palms and later hardened into calluses. From the road, neighbors watched her arrange the gravel beds in tiers and connect them with a maze of pipes. Inside the tall white tank, she fitted an odd elbow-shaped device that came alive every 20 minutes. Water rose quietly through the gravel, then vanished in a sudden gurgling rush before the beds slowly filled again. Flood and drain. Flood and drain. What was she building? More confusion followed when Junie refused to add fertilizer. Instead, she drove to a cattle pond at dusk, filled a jar with murky green water, and poured it into the main tank. For nearly a month afterward, she appeared to do nothing. Each morning, however, Junie dipped a small vial into the water, held it toward the light, watched the color change, and recorded the result in a water-stained notebook. Day after day, she wrote down numbers while the town reached its verdict. Grief had finally broken the Marsh girl. One July morning, she returned with a bag of tiny silver fish. Before planting a single seed, Junie released them into the tank. Harlan Price offered a prediction to anyone willing to listen. "Give it one cold night," he told the men at his counter. "Those barrels are brittle as old buckets. First hard freeze, they'll split open, and she'll be scooping dead fish out of green slime. Mark it down." His prediction almost came true. On the last Sunday of September, a freak cold snap swept down from Canada weeks too early. Before dawn, the temperature fell to 26 degrees. Junie woke to the sound she feared most: water running where no water should have been. Outside, one of the oldest barrels had split along a weakened seam. Half the tank had emptied into the mud. Tiny silver fish lay flat on their sides in 2 inches of freezing water. Junie did not cry. Still wearing her nightgown, she pulled on her father's boots and stepped into the icy mud. With bare fingers, she lifted every fish that still moved and placed it inside the dented minnow bucket. She carried them to the wood stove, then hurried back outside with a flashlight. The crack told her something. A water line remained on the undamaged beds, sharp as a mark on a ruler. Junie opened her notebook and compared it with the readings she had taken all summer. Nothing inside the gravel beds had changed. Cold weather had not destroyed the system. It had exposed its weakest point. Her father's words returned in the darkness. Some things are just waiting on the right use. The split barrel was not the end of her plan. It was information. A teenager buying 6 water testing kits a month eventually attracts attention. Harlan's daughter, who worked the register, mentioned Junie's purchases to Dana Whitfield, the county agricultural extension agent. Dana had stopped by the store for chicken feed on a Thursday. Instead of laughing, she asked for directions to the Marsh place. Most visitors saw the barrels and asked the same question: why would anyone build with junk? Dana walked slowly along the tiers, studied the pipes, and asked something else entirely. "What are your nitrate readings?" Junie stared at her for a moment, then opened the notebook. For the first time in 8 months, someone examined those numbers without smiling. Dana read several pages in silence. "Honey," she finally said, "do you know what you've built out here?" The system had a name: aquaponics. Its hidden engine was already alive inside the barrels. Fish in the main tank produced ammonia, which would become toxic if allowed to accumulate. Natural bacteria converted that ammonia first into nitrite and then into nitrate, a form of nitrogen the plants could absorb. That explained Junie's month of apparent inactivity. She had not been waiting. She had been cycling the water and allowing the bacterial colonies to establish themselves. Suddenly, every strange choice made sense. Gravel beds were not leaking planters. They were growing space for both roots and beneficial bacteria. The self-gurgling pipe was a bell siphon, flooding and draining the beds so the roots received water and oxygen in alternating cycles. Pond water had helped introduce microorganisms. Fish supplied nutrients. Plants cleaned the water before it returned to the tank. Most important, the same water circulated again and again. In the middle of the worst drought in 30 years, Junie had built a food system that needed only a fraction of the water used by a conventional garden. Every discarded barrel had a job. She had understood the system before she knew its name. Dana made a phone call she rarely made. Dr. Elias Ford, head of the aquaculture program at the State University 2 hours north, arrived the following week expecting to encourage a grieving teenager for an afternoon. 4 hours later, he was still there. Dr. Ford measured flow rates, tested the water, examined the roots, and counted the fish. At last, he stood in the October sun with his hands on his hips, looking from the balanced gravel beds to the notebook in Junie's hands. She had built a functioning media bed aquaponic system almost entirely from salvage. It ran on collected rainwater, circulated nutrients naturally, and had been designed by a 17-year-old with no formal training. "I have graduate students who struggle to cycle a system this clean," he said. Then the harvest came. Tomatoes grew so heavy they bent the vines. Basil, lettuce, and kale rose in thick green rows. Peppers shone beneath broad leaves. Chard spread across the upper beds, while strawberries trailed down the lower tiers. All of it grew from fish, gravel, patience, and water that kept returning. Across town, Harlan Price's irrigated corn came in short, pale, and expensive. Behind the Marsh farmhouse, food climbed from the very barrels he had called a junk church. News moves quickly through a small town. Trucks that once slowed to stare began turning into the gravel drive. Men who had laughed at Junie's garbage walked toward the beds with their caps in their hands and stopped before a wall of green growing in the middle of a drought. Harlan arrived last. For a long while, he stood at the edge of the system without speaking. Everyone remembered what he had said during the summer. Junie remembered, too. She could have embarrassed him. She had earned the right. Instead, Junie reached into the nearest bed, picked the ripest tomato on the vine, and placed it in his hand. Gran lived long enough to see the harvest. All autumn, Ada sat wrapped in a quilt beside the beds, eating tomatoes still warm from the sun. She often told Junie that Tom would not have been surprised by any of it. "Not one bit," Gran said. The following spring, Ada died in her sleep, as Tom had. But she left this world after watching her granddaughter grow abundance from the things everyone else had discarded. Junie Marsh still farms with those barrels. More stand there now, reinforced, insulated, and partly sheltered inside the old barn for winter. Neighbors who once came to laugh now arrive with notebooks, hoping to learn. Beside the barn door hangs the dented tin minnow bucket. Perhaps that is the heart of the story. People are quick to decide what has been used up. Dry land, a cracked barrel, a forgotten piece of equipment, or a girl too young, poor, and alone to know better. Yet worth does not disappear simply because others fail to see it. Some things, and some people, are only waiting for the right purpose and the right pair of eyes. Farmer and philosopher Masanobu Fukuoka once wrote, "The ultimate goal of farming is not the growing of crops, but the cultivation and perfection of human beings." Junie did more than grow food from garbage. She became the person capable of seeing what everyone else had missed. So let me leave you with one question tonight. What is something in your life that others dismissed as worthless, but later proved to have value? Share your answer below, along with where you're watching from. And if Junie's story stayed with you, subscribe. We tell a new true-hearted story every week, and I'd be glad to have you with us for the next one.